Okay, welcome to day two. I'm Michael Boniface. I am a member of the AI Leadership Circle, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this roundtable of encountering AI through art with Professor Sarah Cook from the University of Glasgow. I ran the gauntlet today from the school run in Kinross to make this, and I have been very kindly handed these notes by Sam, who was my understudy had I not made it. So thank you very much for that. But yes, looking forward to this talk. Hope you all have a good time, and I'll pass it over to Sarah.
So I hold the button down. So very nice to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. We've put this together in part because we thought that art is a really good lens to try and understand some of the transformations that are happening in the AI sector. It gives us an opportunity to think a little box of AI development. And so what we've done is invite two artists to be with us today. You can see Marion Carré on the screen there, who is joining us from France, and Paul Dolan sitting right in front of the screen there, who has joined us from Newcastle, from the University of Northampton. With my role at the University of Glasgow, where I should say I'm a curator, and also a professor teaching curators how to be curators. So I've basically not quite as an art historian looked at the way artists use programming over the last sort of 20 years, and AI is just the latest form of programming that artists might be using. And I also hold a role that starts next month as a professor of AI and art at the University of Umeå in Sweden, where we'll be appointing a couple of postdocs in art, architecture, and design to try and investigate further, how did we get here? So we have a very loose and open plan for our roundtable because we wanted it to be really driven by who's in the room and what your interests are. We have a couple of different things we could do. And so I thought the first and easiest thing to do would be for you to get to know the person sitting immediately to your left. And through getting to know the person sitting to your left, perhaps you could discuss, just for 5 minutes, where you think AI and art intersect, but particularly maybe what are the types of AI or machine learning systems you might encounter in art. And then when we share those, we'll be able to see how much of us are kind of on the same page and use that to start to foster our discussion. That's my proposal for the minute. We spend 5 minutes just getting to know somebody else in the room, grounding ourselves in terms of where we think AI and art is, and then from that, hear more from Marion and more from Paul and a bit more from me and more from you in a sort of dialogue. I haven't set this up as a roundtable that's going to come out with any great policy recommendations, but I recognize that today is the day to talk about policy recommendations, given UK government announcements. If we do feel like by the end of the discussion we've come to some desire to foreground art in a different way in the discourse than it is at the moment, that would be fab, and I'm happy for us to collect those notes. I should say that we also have in the room colleagues who are both drawing the discussion today. Do you want to say a word about that, to have an artist in the room also? I would welcome you to introduce what you're doing there. That would be fab.
Hi, so I'm Claire Mills. I'm a graphic facilitator or graphic recorder, so my job is to go to events like this and take a visual minute. So I'll be making notes and drawing pictures, and it will be available after the event.
Thank you, that's fantastic. And so we'll have a little bit of teasing out slides and sharing screens, so hopefully you can see both screens. But let's just start by what I said at first. Let's spend 5 minutes getting on the same page with the person on your left. Okay? Hello. Hopefully that's been a good, productive discussion. Should we come back to the main table then? Hopefully that was really useful. Was that useful? Does anybody want to say what it was that they were talking about in terms of where you might encounter AI through art, or where you might encounter different forms of AI systems? Was there anything that people wanted to bring back to the discussion now? No? Yes? No? Was there anything that was discussed that you wanted to share with the group about where you thought you might discover different AI systems in art, or what types of AI art you're looking at or thinking about? Yeah?
Right. We were kind of discussing, I guess it's probably the kind of wider implications of social media, and I think for my generation, the people that were using the kind of AI generated stuff to create their own artworks, and the fact that there was some considerations about copyright and the usage of already existing artworks, and kind of we were talking a little bit about like consent and copyright and all these sort of implications. But yeah, so I think social media is plays a big part in it so far.
So artwork that is generated by AI through prompts is the most kind of commonly understood form of AI art at the minute, I would say. I don't know if that chimes with any other conversations so far.
Yeah. So yeah, we were talking about that. So that's like what the one that people talk about the most. I guess also in the news, like generative AI, it's like kind of a big thing. But we also talk about other forms like using it for music creation, but also using, for example, machine learning, but in a different way, not just to show something colorful, but also to bring attention to some of the flaws of the technologies and to ask questions about the implications of AI in general for the society.
Yes, exactly. So if it's helpful, I have a few slides about this that I can share first, and then we can turn to Marion. So let me just see. Sorry, we've got a bit of slide jockeying here. Thank you very much. That's perfect. So if you jump to the next slide, I like to remind everybody of the Fry test, which is that if any sentence you can replace the technical word with the word magic and the sentence still makes sense, then it's probably bollocks. This comes from Professor Hannah Fry. I would say that this is very common in lots of discussions about AI and art at the minute, where artists say, I've made this using AI, and I wonder if they've made it using magic, or what part of the AI system they have used. If you jump to the next slide, please. You can't read this from here, but I would encourage you to look at the work of Lev Manovich, who is a media theorist and artist who has worked in this space for a long time. And what he points out is that, of course, any aspect of cultural production that could be automated might well be automated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will help us understand the relationship or the human understanding of our relationship to technology. So all of the concerns people have about AI outsourcing the work of artists is relevant here too, but it's not necessarily going to get us any closer to how we understand technology. And the next slide. So that's the avocado chair. I don't know if you've all seen that. That's a classic example of early generative prompt art. I think there's a lot of assumptions about AI and art right now that artists can help us understand AI. And we don't really, I would rather focus on the artists in the room having time to talk about this, so maybe just jump to the next slide. This is the kind of generative work that most people associate. So this was the so-called self-portrait by an AI system that a group of artists made that then sold at auction for a substantial amount of money. The question about work like this, first of all, is that the AI system only produces something that looks like something it's seen before, so nothing actually novel, but also that who owns this work in terms of not the buyer but the creator is a combination of artists and a machine system. Yet the copyright accrues back to the artist rather than to the system or the collaboration between them, which I think may or may not be on the next slide. There's a couple of things that we'll talk about as we go through this in terms of the key kind of headline or highlights that you see in the news right now about AI and art, so that Rembrandt paintings have been restored using AI. Again, that's a kind of restyling or copying. or that DALL-E will make artists obsolete. As I've said before, Nora Kahn writes very clearly about how this is a sort of dreamlike hallucination of the machine, and again, doesn't get to the point of whose labor is involved, which is something that I think Paul will talk to. And then that an AI-generated picture won an art prize, and artists aren't happy about it. I mean, that all of the systems of computing and also the systems of the art world tend to rely on these rules of some kind that are created by groups of people to decide what those rules might be. And maybe artists have always been very good about breaking rules and challenging rule-based systems, so that hasn't changed. Next slide, please. We were talking in our conversation just earlier about robots and automated systems, and so I always think it's useful to remember that artists have always made robots as well. This is Touchy, which is a robot made by the artist Eric Sui, which has his eyes closed unless you're holding his hand. And if you hold his hand or make physical contact with him, then his eyes open and then he can see his way around town and take photographs with his automated headset on. And so is this AI or not? No, I mean, it's not AI in the mainstream sense of it now as a system that is somehow learning from a machine program or from a data set, but it is a form of autonomous system. So I think this is where it starts to get quite murky. And I think on the next slide, we have this question about, again, our historic structuring of art in a copyright sense being made by an individual creator becomes problematic when we start to see the interplay between the human and the machine, or between systems, data sets, which have different copyright implications, and artists. Next slide, please. So 2 projects I wanted to just talk about quickly before we pass over to Marion and to Paul. One is this work by an artist named Tomiko Teal called Lend Me Your Face, Go Fake Yourself. And this was a commission for the Photographers Gallery. And let's try and see if on the next slide, if it plays. If you click on the image, will it? No. Okay, sorry. Oh.
This is the moment when the dawn breaks and the curtain goes up on a new act in our great national drama.
So what Tomiko did was she allowed you on a website to just upload a single picture of yourself, and from that single picture immediately created a deep fake of somebody else's voice in your mouth. If you go to the next slide, it's nicer than listening to Boris.
All you can talk about is the money and the fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
And so this is quite an old work already. This is like, 2-3 years old, and you can see just obviously how quickly these systems have changed. This was, to some people, maybe their first time experiencing that uncanny moment of a deep fake where you see your face animated but somebody else's voice. And obviously that technology is just advancing with such rapidity and at such scale. But I think artists allow us to remember what that first weird moment was like, right? And that's where I've framed today's roundtable around this idea of the encounter, because you might encounter an artwork and not realize it's telling you something about AI, whereas you might encounter AI and not realize it's AI, right? So that's where there's this potential moment for recognition. You can skip that slide. You can skip that slide. I wanted to just remember about how instructions function, because we often forget that somebody instructs the system to do something, and with AI so much of this is now automated, but that artists have always been interested in instruction as a way of navigating the world and pointing to that moment of serendipity where an instruction fails or an instruction succeeds. And this is an artwork by Yoko Ono, which is an instruction piece which says, think that snow is falling. Think that snow is falling everywhere, all the time. And when you talk with a person, think that snow is falling between you and the person. And stop conversing when you think the person is covered by snow. So what I like about thinking of artworks as instructions and trying to make that link to AI is that a program has a beginning, a middle, and an end point, potentially, but it has also a learning cycle, and that cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. And we don't often see the process of the AI's learning of the machine's learning. Instead, we are focused on the outcome, the end result, which is why we see those generative portraits or the way that texts and images are used in social media now, is seeing the end result, but not seeing what went into the learning and the training and the instruction. Any more slides? Skip that one. So this is me asking Google about AI art. And you can see that the answers that come back are, is AI art theft? Is it copyrighted? Is it ethical? Is it illegal? Is it really art? Is it bad? So if this is what the mainstream thinks about AI art, then we have some way to go to try and understand actually what artists are doing with the technology that is not illegal, not bad, interesting, and the same questions of copyright exist. And then the last slide, no, not that one, maybe. Okay, so there's questions here about which relate to how the museum interfaces with the work and how works are preserved over time, and what responsibility we have to encourage our national institutions to try and capture work made using these technologies, because these technologies will advance and we won't remember what it was like to live through these early moments of experience with them. So that's enough from me. Thank you very much for sorting slides. That was really helpful. And if Marion is up for speaking about her work, I have invited Marion to talk, and I'm sorry that she's not here in the room with us, but virtually, but it's great to have her because she did a project with the National Library of Scotland that was exhibited here in Glasgow. And so, Marion, are you happy to just speak a little bit about your work and how it might connect to any of these issues that we've raised so far?
Yes, for sure. I'm really happy to be here with you today, even if I'm not here. I'm in Paris in the middle of trash and strikes, but I'm happy to join. Maybe first to tell you a bit more about me. So can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. It's been 6 years now that I'm interested about art and AI, and I'm exploring the subject through different perspectives. So I have a startup, I am teaching a course about art and AI in Paris, and I'm also creating, and my art practice is, what is important for me is to create encounters between archival materials and AI or new technologies, because what I like to do is to create a kind of odd setup that can help us take a step back and think about the impact of those technologies, also think about those archival materials in another way. And this is what I try to do with the project that was presented in Glasgow. So just a little disclaimer, it was done in 2021, so it was before ChatGPT. I was using earliest form of the GPT, it was GPT-2, but then with all of this ChatGPT news and we hear about it all the time right now, it has a new kind of enlightenment for the project. So this project was really about what I care about was how we can explore the way truths are created. So I wanted to dive more into the subject of fake news and how AI can be used to create fake news, but I wanted to do it from a historical perspective because the subject of fake truth or fake news is really old, and it's really interesting to take a step back because in the history we've seen we see that the creation of fake news evolved with the techniques that are available, and also the perception of information evolved with the social context we live in. The crisis can have an impact on the development of fake news. So I wanted to have a broader perspective on that. And so the first part of this work, it was a 1 year long artist residency with really interesting actors and partners. And one of them was the National Library of Scotland. And so I spent the first months of the artist residency to really go to talk to Scottish and French archivists and historians to try to get also the relationship with the archive this issue of fake archive that is really interesting and more complex than what we think, the impact that new technologies have on the proliferation of impact, and then I tried to find a way to express all of those concerns and issues in the work I created. So to create this work, I selected the dataset of broadsides from the National Library of Scotland. And the broadsides are really interesting because it's like the ancestor of tabloids. So it's documents that have a complicated relationship with truth. And I selected 500 texts of crime broadside because most of the time they talk about trial, which is an event that try to guess what happened or not, and they talk about it in a way that is sometimes amplifying the truth, so it was really interesting. And I read a lot of text, I keep the 500 of them, and I trained an AI, so at that time it was GPT-2, which is the ancestor of GPT-3, the GPT-4 that are now available, and I trained it to be able to generate new text of archives.
I'll just put your slides up, Avion, at the same time so that people can see your slides at the same time as you're talking.
Perfect. And let me know when time's out. But just to let you know that yes, so then I trained the AI to generate those texts, and it was a really long process because the process of creating the dataset was super long. Then the process of training and do the back and forth and try to set up the AI to have the right kind of text I wanted was really long. And at the end, I keep 100 texts, and those texts were a kind of mix of really plausible texts. And sometimes I was also quite disturbed myself because I had a fight with the real one and fake one, so I was able to distinguish them, but without that it could have been complicated. And I also keep texts that were kind of strange. And in the course of events, you see that things are a bit, you can feel that it's not a real text. And I wanted to have those kind of two texts in my final dataset of fake text. And then, so I created a triptych of 3 different artworks to put, to show those archives, and so those 3 artworks display a selection of real archives, and in the real archives, I keep also texts that talk about really strange stories, like people that are supposed to be there, but in fact they are not, and stuff like that. So it was a confusing data set of text in the end, the real one and the fake one. And so the first artwork, I think you can see the first image was an installation that happened in Paris at the École Nationale des Chartes, which shows 3 matrix printers that are, yes, that's the right picture, that are displayed on bookshelf, and they are printing continuously those generated texts of archive. And I wanted to show the generative part of the process, because you have continuously new texts that are created, and it gives a sort of reproductive function to the archives. And also I wanted to create a link with what historian and archivists describe as this process of continuously growing dataset or archive with new technologies. So that was the first part. The second part was an online platform where you can see, so it was randomly displayed real and fake archives, only the text, and people had to choose if they wanted to archive or destroy the text. And what was super interesting is that a lot of people archive text and destroy real text. So that was the artistic perspective of that, but also there is a paper that has been done with Sobolab, which was another partner of the residency, and with 2 researchers, we then published a paper. It's in Open Science Wild Society journal, where you can see also a study about how people perceive those archives, and indeed they were unable to distinguish the fake one and the real one. So that was the platform, and the final and third artwork was an installation that was shown at the brigade in Glasgow, and you can see in this installation a red register. So I think in the picture it's open, it's in the middle of the room, and the register people can read it, and it was only the text that people wanted to archive from the platform, and they were displaying this kind of official red register. And then on the floor you can see scrambled papers of the text people wanted to destroy, so it looks like trash. But what I wanted to do with this final artwork was to completely blur the lines between real and fake, because in the register you have real and fake, and on the floor also, so that's it.
Thank you, Marion. It's fantastic. It's great to hear about the work and to see how actually it's changed a lot given now ChatGPT. But what hasn't changed, I suppose, is the use of AI in managing the archives of the works and thinking about how AI is increasingly used in archival practice, in cataloging. And so the Broadsides collection, I think, was really great. I think we'll hold questions for Marion, if that's okay, so that we have time to hear from Paul, and then we've got the kind of artists more in dialogue, because what I was hoping is that we would get two different perspectives on how AI and art intersect with each other. And so Marion, as she said, is kind of working with historical archives and then using tools in processes of development and quickly being outstripped by how those tools have changed over time. But Paul is coming at it from a different angle, so can I hand to you?
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for the invite to be here as well. So my work is more kind of engaging with AI from an environment kind of perspective.
Closer.
Okay, sorry, I feel like a tinny AI sci-fi character in a spaceship, but I can deal with that. Yes, so my work is it kind of engages with AI more from an environmental perspective. Over the last 2 years, I've been researching render farms, which are the sites where kind of sites of mass production of digital images, often for cinema, for animation, and other digital images that we see for advertising and things like that. So over the last couple of years of trying to find out where these digital images that we consume every day are made, the kind of where of the image, the where of the digital image. I found out that they were basically just in data centers, and over the last few years there's been a massive movement from specialized areas and render farm setups where there might be columns and rows of graphics cards all processing images intensely in small rooms or buildings. The majority of them have shifted into the cloud, the so-called cloud. So a lot of the processing is taking place in data centers around the world. So that's kind of problematic for me because the cloud has this inherent sense of immateriality, and AI as heavily processed images as well kind of perpetuate this idea of things that don't have a material basis or a geographical position. So my work is about trying to connect the production of digital images and processed computational images back to some kind of geographical territory or place, and with that, trying to work out, the kind of labor and ethics of how those images are produced. So just recently, I made a show which was off the back of visiting some data centers in Iceland, which is usually held up as the kind of bastion of green, sustainable energy, because a lot of the data centers over there are powered by geothermal energy. So we visited geothermal power plants and data centers before we were asked to leave by some some kind of very polite young person who was the lone security guard in a data center. What was interesting is that very few people work in these data centers. They're produced, they're built by teams and then there's very few people who actually work in them. And I suspect it's the same for HPC data centers that are kind of working with kind of science simulations and AI processes as well. They're not particularly human places. There might be one or two people, security guards there, but otherwise they're quite kind of weird autonomous rows and columns of CPUs and GPUs in places. So yeah, but the work that I made was growing basil seeds from the heat generated by semiconductors inside of a gallery space, and the computer was displaying a simulation of one of those data center places in Iceland that I'd recreated using 3D modeling and kind of textures, and then the heat from the actual computer was being kind of pushed out into a customized greenhouse that was the same shape as a data center, and basil seeds were being grown successfully, I might add, in that greenhouse during the course of the exhibition. So one of the things about that work is looking at kind of recirculation of energy, and there are a few different companies in the world at the moment that are trying to use the heat produced from processing images and any data processing and recirculating that energy back into different places. There's a company in Paris called Quanot. They've got specialized digital radiators that they've installed in Parisian households, and the idea is that you could be sitting next to a radiator in your apartment, kind of warming yourself in the winter, and all of that heat is being generated through processing and semiconductor heat. And there's another place in Amsterdam called Block Heating, who are using specialized data centers with water loops to grow tomatoes in greenhouses, and the water goes back into the data center and then cools all of the semiconductors and then goes back around to the greenhouse in a loop. So yeah, I'll kind of stop there, maybe as a prompt for discussion.
I think, yes, it would be wonderful in both examples. I mean, I'm putting artists on the spot and using them as examples of ways in which I think we could consider how AI is understood culturally. But in both of these, both in Paul's work and Marion's work, there is a question of the underpinning of what's gone into the production of the image or the production of the text. And so it raises the question of how much AI development is in the black box and how much we know about, and whether or not artists can help illuminate that for us. One thing I'm curious about with your work, Paul, is how you can sort of peel back the layer almost of the generation of the image. You're going very tangibly and materially to recognize the location in which that image is produced, but are there other ways that you think about programming to reveal the underpinnings of the image creation?
Do you mean in terms of like software processes?
Yeah.
It's so fragmented and uneven. I think the production of images, I think it's, all of the production of an image, thinking about the kind of adjacent production of images for CGI in films. I'm assistant professor at Northumbria, where I teach onto the animation program there. We've got lots of undergrads who spend hours and days and weeks and months making work on a computer, sitting in front of software, modeling, texturing, animating, and just the sheer kind of amount of human labor that goes into producing them is one kind of like compression of labor, that all of those hours, and then the image lasts on your eye for a 24th of a second when you're watching it on screen. There's really weird kind of compressions and thresholds of time and labor that go into it. But yeah, I think the same with the processing as well. It's fragmented, and at different stages through the production of an image, then there's just radically different kind of min-max like arrangements of labor and control, and a lot of software is completely black box though, and for most people using software systems, especially with AI as well, it's really incredibly difficult to try and peel that back. So there's this level of kind of black boxness in terms of actually knowing how software works. For most people, it's beyond them really, unless you're a computer programmer, and even then, But it's the same with the environment as well, as that kind of extension of the black box to incorporate its material origins as well as its labor origins as well, I think.
And Marion, you also teach and you also work with artists, and how are you finding their feelings about how the AI systems might be replacing the kind of labor that they're doing, or the way in which they might be using AI systems to interrogate the construction of images and the construction of texts? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I think the whole debate about how our artists are going to be replaced by AI is really reducing what an artist is doing, actually. Because we only think about the production part of his or her work, which is maybe, I don't know, for a graphic designer, sketching the image, or for a writer writing the text, but in fact, it's just a tiny part of the process, and the creative process is way bigger. And it's also my question to, my answer to the question whether AI can replace artists completely and do exactly the same thing. It's completely impossible, because you have to think about concepts. You can see, I think, in both Paul's works and my work, that it's really about thinking about the concept, having, I don't know, some sense of what's happening in the society, and going to see people and feel stuff that computer and AI can't feel at all. So I think that the process, the whole creative process is more complex than when we try to make people think when we say AI are going to replace artists.
Do we have some other thoughts in the room or questions for our artists about these issues? Yeah.
Yeah, just a question kind of like for the artists. Like, you guys were talking kind of about kind of time. Do you think AI will kind of change how art is consumed by the wider population? Because if you can kind of quicken your creative process, because I feel like sometimes artists, you're valued for kind of, you know, how much time you might, or you, like you say, your process. So if it's kind of quicker and you can create things a little bit quicker, do you think art will be kind of more accessible for other people in a sense?
I'll have a go at this one first. That's right. I think the main benefit, I think, of that compression of time, of any time saving, is that it points towards the whole point of why we generate images in the first place. And if something is too easy, if you can compress it and automate it to that point, then you just kind of think, why bother to do this? And I think it's kind of like Marion was saying, that you know, artists, there's a kind of human engagement with the world that is something that I don't think can be automated, really. The compression of that process kind of negates the point of making art, I think. Just recently I asked kind of ChatGPT to generate like a concept for an artwork, and typed in loads of keywords, and it came back with something, but it was awful, really. It was kind of, you know, if you could imagine a really good GCSE project, then it was kind of close to that. But yeah, that compression of time for me, the only useful thing that it does is kind of makes us question the origins of art anyway in the first place, I think.
Yes, and I think actually it makes me want to slow down, like, because it's easier to really create really quickly images. I think images are not enough now. If anyone can create images in a few seconds, as an artist, we have to focus on something else. And I think, from my perspective, it's really important to slow down. And as you mentioned, Paul, think about the meaning of what we are doing, why are we doing this, and take this time and don't compress the creative process because of that.
There's a couple of good theorists to relate to that question as well. And one's French theorist Paul Virilio, who talks about drumology and his theory of time, and a lot of that's to do with the dangers of kind of compression and speed. And he talks about how the delegation of kind of tasks to computers, and the speed at which there's no time to think or to have a human aspect of that, so it's quite a dangerous proposition.
Questions in the room? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm going to be slightly contrarian and certainly less academic. Among many hats, I'm a crime writer, and what you find is that people who write crime series or any series, read fantasy or whatever, have a challenge of keeping up with the demand of their readers. So the people who make a living, if they are independently published, say, because making a living traditionally published is even more difficult, but independently published, there's really a formula around, you have to have rapid releases. Write a series and have rapid releases. And for some people that's easy, and for other people they just take longer to write, And so I would view that actually for novels and series, this ability to just kind of get some assistance to get the words down that aren't the core of your story, because your story is still one that you decide, but like the description of the trees and the whatever, but also learning from your own style. So if you are on book 11 of a series, then actually, the generative AI can support that a lot better. And in a sense, it is then this rapid release is the only way to make enough money, because books cost like 99p. And for a whole swathe of authors, I think it is going to not lessen the artistic value of their work. It's just going to allow them to make a living to then keep doing it.
Yeah, I totally take this point, and I think if we look back to the history of computer graphics in feature films, in movies, we recognize that we watched a lot of really crappy graphics for a long number of years before the graphics got good. Yeah, like that moment in Titanic where all the people on the deck go flat as it pans across. I love that moment. But that, as a result of that, that frees up those creators, those directors, to make different things, right? More ambitious things. So I think there is always going to be arguments for not necessarily compression of the creative process, but time saving in production of one aspect to enable greater time to be spent on creative process in another aspect of a project. So there's pros and cons there. Young-Yan, do you want to say something?
Yes, if I could just interject for a second. We are pretty much at time. However, this room is not being used for the next session. So there are 3 other sessions running, if anyone wishes to go to them. There's AI and FinTech in A, there's Your Care, AI and Healthcare in B, and there's Corporate Accountability in C. However, if you wish to stay in this room and continue your conversation, you are more than welcome to do so. So I'll leave that to your discretion.
Thank you very much. Young-Yan, you just want to make your point, and then if anybody does want to run out, of course, we can thank our artists.
I just wanted to follow on with the comment about time saving, because I don't think it's just a matter of time saving so that you can spend creative time on something. It also actually encourages creativity when you can produce things very quickly, many different versions all at once. So I don't think, I'm sorry to be a bit contrary, but I don't think it's just about the time that goes into the production that makes it valuable. It's some combination of the person's ability versus what can be enabled by the technology. This is what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just different use cases, isn't there? I'm thinking about, for example, in Photoshop for a long time now, there's been kind of neural kind of support for kind of changing photographs and things, and those tools are slightly less kind of problematic in terms of just being useful for artists, really. But I think in my statement, I was thinking about kind of text to image based prompts and some of those things that are framed as more of a challenge to the artists. I think where there are those larger questions about if you can type in a word into AI text to image prompt service and generate an image, then why would you do that? So, but yeah, so I take the point. There are use cases where actually they can be quite useful.
So as you can tell, we're in the midst of a change in culture and an acceptance of that change. So I really thank the artists very much for coming and sharing their work about it, and thank you for coming and listening, and hopefully it feeds into whatever you're thinking about in terms of how AI is functioning in your discipline. And I think in the cultural sector, we're very happy to to be the ones who kind of record those moments of change and hold on to them and then show them later so that we can remember what happened. So thank you very much.